Whenever you hear the name Mathew Perry, it will bring back memories like it was yesterday, but mostly good ones that Mathew brought to us from film and TV. But you're also met with shock that he's gone. It's another death that seems too soon and senseless. His life was built around entertaining people, with his natural ability to make people laugh. Although he was plagued with addiction, struggling for survival, even once he found freedom, trying to have a normal private life with a career as big as Mathew's, it doesn't allow it. He was open and honest about who and what he had done. Addiction is cruel, and many say it's the curse that never leaves you, like living with grief from the loss of a loved one. It's always there. Some days it'll show itself, and some days you have power over it. The last day of Mathew's life is documented. It's not filled with bad decisions of someone risking life. It's just a man enjoying the sun in his face, and in the end, he left a legacy, but an empty house with money and things of the world, and parents that are grieving the loss of a son. This is the last moment of Mathew Perry.
Please welcome back to the show, Mathew Perry.
I was in a dark room meeting with nothing but drug dealers and completely alone.
You know, I feel like I've lost her.
For some reason, it's obviously because I was on Friends, more people will listen to me.
My life is, I'm a drug addict. I'm a person that if I have a drink, I can't stop.
Tonight, we begin with breaking news. Friends star Mathew Perry has died. Law enforcement sources tell the LA Times the actor was found dead at his home.
Most people know Mathew from his obvious role as Chandler on Friends, but what they may not know is that Mathew had a run of movies that are highly underrated in Hollywood. In the 90s, Mathew was attempting to be a standalone actor, his own star, a road he was trying to make as the leading role for big Hollywood movies and comedies, trying to venture off into drama. But for the most part, Mathew shined in comedies. But there was a moment in the 90s where Mathew was filming a movie that was supposed to be huge for both leading actors in it, but the project would turn into a nightmare for him in the end. The movie Almost Heroes that has now been completely swept underneath the rug of Hollywood movies because the other leading role in it was Chris Farley, who died before the movie was even in theaters. Mathew talks about his time in 1997 when Farley died. It's a moment that brought him into complete darkness and increased an already bad appetite for drugs. He says he knew that Chris's disease had progressed much faster than his own when Chris had died. It brought anger to Mathew, dealing with his own addiction and having a public job, and with that having to promote a movie that he wanted nothing to do with anymore, and that no one was excited about because the person attached to it who was highly loved by the world had died, and were still mourning him. Mathew says that he stayed high the whole time. It was just pushing him out of control, where career and personal life had found conflict with each other. It's kinda sad that Mathew doesn't get the credit he deserves when it comes to his performance in movies. He was a phenomenal actor at delivering comedy and connecting with his audience, but his saving grace as always was that of his character of Chandler, of his bread and butter show, Friends, still to this day being one of the biggest TV shows in American television. The reason it's important to look at Mathew's life in a big way, but also in a fast way that builds everything together with his story, is the time of transformation you see of drug use, abusing himself, stress, sleepless nights, days of going with no sleep, and some nights he should have never woken up. By the time Mathew is in his late 40s, his body has been through so much with abuse from alcohol, pills, substance that are just going from hand to hand at Hollywood parties. In 2022, Mathew started to revamp his look in Hollywood and his life. He knew that things were somewhat of a mess towards his public look. He had been working on a book for some time and released it that year. The world can now read about his past ailments and how he wanted to focus on helping people that had the same kind of disease, he said. He shares secrets, sickness, wants, desires, depression, and now spends the majority of his time working on smaller projects and film and going around talking to crowds about how to live through addiction. One big element that Mathew gives in his testimony, he says that this is a disease that he has and it simply just doesn't go away. He defends this many times over the years, even getting into heated conversations on TV shows, saying addiction is not a choice, but a disease. And now that Mathew is in the later part of his life, walking into his 50s, he knows that his body has taken severe damage. His speech is slurred, his heart has been hurt. He says that he's been in rehab over 65 times, sober living homes, millions and millions of dollars spent trying to get away from the sickness, and in his late 40s, almost died from his colon exploding. It should have killed him, but he was given more time. What many people may not be aware of is that Mathew's addiction goes back before Friends. It started in his childhood, but working his way through Hollywood, landing a spot on Friends, he developed the character Chandler. He said most days he was hungover, but never did drugs on set. But he also fell in love with his character, Chandler. Maybe somewhere in there, looking at that character, maybe it's who Mathew really wanted to be, how he looked at himself in his mind. Fun, loving, assertive, outspoken, witty, and the unspoken leader of the gang of friends, who knew when to be silly and serious. In the early 2000s, Mathew does an interview talking about his life up until that point. With addiction, it's almost sadly the same he'll give 2 decades later, saying almost the exact same things, verbatim. But in that time, from the early 2000s interview till Mathew gives his last interview, just a year before his death, in that timeline, it'll be his hardest road. It's sad to look at this large amount of time, because it's the years where Mathew is truly hurting himself. It's now October in 2023, 5 days before Mathew Perry loses his life, to where we see him live out his last days, and learning about elements in his life that compiled sadly. Key things to know about in Mathew's life at this moment. It's said that Mathew had just quit smoking, or was at least trying to quit smoking, from his habit of 2 packs a day, and also trying to lose weight, taking tamoxifen. Mathew was also taking a high dosage of another drug, trying to help him with his addiction, and also having infusions of ketamine. It's known by many that spoke to Mathew in the last days of his life. He was in good spirits. He said his depression was under control. His habits, he was active, happy. He was keeping in touch with friends, keeping his mind busy, and really trying to rebuild his life and career. A somewhat weird element would take place on October 23rd, towards the end of the day. At Mathew's home, he was at home relaxing with his assistant, enjoying the nighttime sky, sitting in his jacuzzi. His assistant takes this picture of him with a caption saying under it, "So warm, swirling around, makes you feel good? ? I'm Matt Man." The post is seen, people laugh, comment, and it disappears into the past. On October 27th, the day before Mathew's death, the last picture of him is taken. He's in downtown Los Angeles having lunch with a friend. They sit down together for almost 2 hours, eating and chatting. It's the last pictures taken of Mathew. The next day, October 28th, Mathew's last day alive. It's really no different than any other day. He's happy and keeping his routine going of working out, playing pickleball. And one of the last people we know that Mathew had contact with was Jennifer Aniston. She said that they talked back and forth through text. Mathew seemed happy, excited, that he was on the right track, keeping close with friends, staying in touch with his loved ones. But most of the day was spent in Mathew's favorite place, his home. It was his main shield from keeping him away from making bad decisions. In the middle of the day, around 3 p.m., Mathew is left alone. His assistant has left to go run errands. Somewhere in that time, he gets into his swimming trunks, walks into his backyard, and climbs into his jacuzzi. No one knows for certain, detail by detail, what happens next, whether it took 10 minutes or 30 minutes. But Mathew slips into a deep sleep, almost unconscious, where his body falls to the bottom of the jacuzzi, and it drowns him. The drug, ketamine, that Mathew was taking to help with his depression and relax him and trying to help him from going back to drugs or alcohol, was in the end the element that he self-medicated too much of, and it killed him. Mathew's assistant arrives back just a little after 4, seeing Mathew in the jacuzzi, pulling him out. He was already gone. They call 911, and within minutes, police are there. As soon as the whispers are out that something has happened in Mathew Perry's home, people swarm the location. Every paparazzi in Los Angeles is at his front door. His mother and stepfather arrive at his home. Mathew's stepfather, Keith Morrison, meets Mathew's real father outside to let them in. They all cry together, mourning the loss of a son. It's a phone call they all feared, but knew it could always come. And it did. Soon everyone will know the news. They take Mathew's body from his home, and the house that he loved and showed off has now just become a tomb for his belongings. His funeral is held on November 23rd. It's small and private, as much as it can be. And months later, the report of what happened to Mathew that day would be revealed. His autopsy report would come back as acute effects of ketamine. Mathew had just simply overdone it, made a bad choice getting into his hot tub. They found ketamine in his blood and in his stomach. It's sad to think that Mathew never found the peace in life that he deserved, finding lasting, long, healthy freedom from drugs, never having the true freedom to start a family, bearing children, because his addiction had overrun his life to where the majority of his time was just spent trying to stay sober. There's no doubt that Mathew was great at what he did, and he'll always be loved for his work. Mathew Perry, we'll always remember you.
Thank you very much for your support over the years, too.